The story of military coup in West Africa began on January 13, 1963, when Togo experienced the region's first coup, but it was Nigeria's turn just 3 years later, on January 15, 1966, a shocking event that would go down in history as one of the bloodiest coups in Africa. To understand why this happened, we must journey back into Nigeria's early political landscape. After nearly a century under British rule, Nigeria gained independence in 1960. The whole country agog with celebration. Little did not know that 6 years down the line, a bloody coup would take place. British colonization had merged the Northern and Southern Protectorates in 1914 under Frederick Lord Lugard, creating a diverse country with deeply rooted ethnic and regional differences. As independence approached, the colonial administration began a process called Nigerianization, transferring military control from the British officers to local Nigerian soldiers. But this move had unintended consequences. The more educated Igbo from the eastern region filled the officer ranks of the army, while the less educated Northerners took up lower level roles. This ethnic imbalance within the military mirrored and worsened the growing divide in Nigeria's political landscape. By 1965, the military was led by Major General Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi, an Igbo officer. The army itself was split into two brigades, one in the north under Brigadier Samuel Ademologun, a westerner, and the other in the south under Brigadier Zachariah Mahamarari, a northerner. Meanwhile, Nigeria's political structure was also lopsided. The Northern People's Congress, dominant in the largely Hausa Fulani North, controlled 134 out of 312 parliamentary seats. The Igbo-led NCNC had 89 seats, and the Yoruba-dominated Action Group had only 73 seats. Tension began to build, particularly in the West, where political tensions reached a breaking point. After the imprisonment of popular Yoruba leader Chief Obafemi Awolowo in 1963, Chief Samuel Akintola, viewed by many as a northern puppet, won the regional election in 1965 amid accusation of widespread rigging and violence. The result was chaos in the streets, a violent uprising nicknamed Operation Wetie, where political thugs set homes and offices ablaze in protest. The country was on the brink of collapse. Corruption, electoral fraud, ethnic rivalry, and regional resentment pushed Nigeria towards the brink. In this storm of unrest, a group of young army officers, frustrated and idealistic, decided to act. By August 1965, Major Emmanuel Ifajuna in the south and Major Patrick Chukwuma Nzeogwu in the north began plotting a coup. Their goal was simple: to cleanse Nigeria of its corrupt leadership and restore order. But what they set in motion would forever change the course of the country's history and ignite a cycle of military intervention that will haunt Nigeria for decades. Now let's take a look at the key players behind the January coup. The coup was executed by a group of young officers, including Emmanuel Ifajuna, Kaduna Nzeogwu, Adewole Ademoyoga, Timothy Onwatuegu, Chris Anuforo, Don Okafor, Humphrey Chukwuka, Emmanuel Nwobosi, Ganiyu Adeleke, John Atompeya, Fola Oyewole, and Ben Ulie. Their plans, as stated by Nzeogwu, was to topple the government, release Chukwuma from prison, and install him as president. Contrary to popular belief, Nzeogwu was not the originator of the coup. The idea began in Lagos with Major Emmanuel Ifajuna, Don Okafor, Anuforo, and Captain Ubonna Oji, who later recruited Nzeogwu, a military instructor in Kaduna. Nzeogwu then brought in Ademoyoga and Onwatuegu, both of whom had previously served with him in Kano. Facing challenges in the West, all attempts to recruit officers from the 4th Battalion in Ibadan were unsuccessful. They instead had to rely on Captain Nwobosi, the commanding officer of the 2nd Field Battery in Abeokuta, to travel to Ibadan and carry out the coup. He was also a former schoolmate of Major Kaduna Nzeogwu and Anuforo. Many junior officers and NCOs unknowingly aided the coup by obeying routine order to guard strategic positions. Ethnic dynamics also played a subtle role. Except for Ademoyoga, a Yoruba from the west, most of the coup plotters were Igbo from the eastern region. While this may not have been intentional, shared ethnic backgrounds likely helped to maintain the coup's secrecy. Realizing that their senior officers were virtually certain to oppose the coup, the majors knew that they could not successfully execute the revolution unless those superior officers could somehow be neutralized. The coup plotters divided their mission into 4 regional units. Major Emmanuel Ifajuna led the Lagos operation, the largest group with 22 soldiers. Their primary target included Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa, Finance Minister Festus Okotie-Eboh, top military commanders such as the GOC of the army, the commanding officer of the 1st and 4th Battalion who were visiting Lagos, the Chief of Army Staff, the Adjutant General and the Quartermaster General, even the President, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, then abroad on a medical leave, was marked as a target. In the north, Major Kaduna Nzeogwu and Major Timothy Onwatuegu led operations focused on eliminating the Premier of the Northern Region, the commanding officer of the 1st Brigade and the head of the Nigerian Military Training College in Kaduna. Captain Emmanuel Nwobosi headed the Western Region unit, targeting the Premier and Deputy Premier of the West, while Lieutenant Colonel Jerome Ogochi was responsible for the East, where the Premier of the Eastern Region was their key target. One major mistake in the plan was the lack of a unified stance on whether targets should be executed. According to Captain Nwobosi, the officers couldn't agree, so they left the decision to individual discretion based on situational judgment. This decision led to inconsistencies in how the coup was executed and later fueled accusation of ethnic targeting. In Kaduna, the northern operations were split into 3 sub-teams. Nzeogwu personally led an assault on the residence of the Saduana of Sokoto, firing anti-tank shells at the building. He found the Premier hiding with his family and staff and shot him dead. His wife and a loyal bodyguard were also killed while trying to protect him. Meanwhile, Onwatuegu led troops to Brigadier Ademologun's home, where he killed the brigadier and his wife in their bedroom. The circumstances surrounding the death of Colonel Ralph Shodinde, head of NMTC, remain unclear. Captain Ben Bulie's unit successfully took over strategic installations in Kaduna, including 2nd Brigade headquarters, the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation, and a telephone exchange. By this point, the northern region had effectively fallen under the control of the coup plotters. In Lagos, Major Emmanuel Ifajuna, alongside Humphrey Chukwuma, Don Okafor, and Adewale Ademoyoga, coordinated the operation. On the night of January 14, 1966, many senior officers attended a party for Brigadier Marari's wedding. Some coup plotters also attended to avoid suspicion. After the party, they gathered at Ifajuna's home to finalize the plan. Ifajuna divided his men into 3 units. One, led by 2nd Lieutenant Godfrey Ezedibo, was tasked with arresting Finance Minister Festus Okotie. Another group guarded the operations vehicle. The third, led by Ifajuna himself, moved to arrest Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa. Between 2 and 3 a.m., Ifajuna and his men overpowered security at Balewa's home, arrested him and later picked up Okotie-Eboh. Both were transported to the Federal Gas Officers' Mess, the plotters' meeting point. Mai Marari tried to escape through the bush, but unknowingly flagged down Ifajuna's car, thinking it was friendly. Ifajuna and Ezedibo shot him on the spot, an act witnessed by the detained Prime Minister sitting in the car. The convoy later diverted to Ikoyi Hotel, where 2 senior officers, Lieutenant Colonel David Ejo and Lieutenant Colonel Abogo Lagema, were staying. Lagema was tricked into coming down and was shot dead, while Ejo narrowly escaped. In other parts of Lagos, Major Anifuro killed Quartermaster General Lieutenant Colonel Unegbe, one of the few Igbo victims, despite rumors that his death was over Unegbe's refusal to hand over key to the armory. In reality, Unegbe had no such control. Meanwhile, Major General Aguiyi-Ironsi, the Army's general officer commanding, escaped death by being away at another party when Okafor's men arrived his house. In the Western region, Captain Emmanuel Nwobosi led the operation from Abeokuta to Ibadan. They arrested the Deputy Premier, Femi Fani-Kayode, but his wife alerted the Premier, Samuel Akintola. When the plotters arrived at Akintola's residence, Akintola resisted with gunfire, but was ultimately killed by Nwobosi. Back in the East and Midwest, orders were sent from Lagos to arrest regional leaders. Captain Joseph Ihedibo led troops to Benin and placed the Midwest Premier, Chief Dennis Osadebe, under house arrest. In the East, Lieutenant Colonel Ugochi arrested Premier of the Eastern Region, Dr. Michael Okpala. By morning in Lagos, the coup leaders, Major Ifajuna, Ademoyoga, Anufuru and Chukwuma regrouped at the Federal Guard mess with their captives. On departure, Lieutenant Colonel James Palm was executed by Major Anufuru, signaling the coup's brutal and chaotic conclusion in Lagos. After receiving words that Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa and Finance Minister Festus Okotie had been kidnapped, General Aguiyi-Ironsi rushed to the Federal Gas Barrack. He ordered his men not to take instruction from anyone but him, and warned Regimental Sergeant Major against following orders from junior officers. Ironsi then went to Lagos Police Headquarters, just missing Major Ademoyoga, who had left moments earlier. At the station, Ironsi confronted soldiers posted by the coup plotters and ordered them back to their barracks. At the 2nd Battalion headquarters, Ironsi ordered the arrest of Major Ifajuna and his co-conspirators and mobilized loyal troops to retake control of Lagos. Realizing that Ironsi was alive and organizing a counter-offensive, the coup plotters began to flee. Ironsi then instructed Lieutenant Colonel David Ejo to return to Enugu and restore order in the east. Ejo successfully recalled soldiers deployed under Ifajuna's earlier orders and crushed the coup in the eastern and midwestern regions. In the north, Major Nzeogwu had seized control of Kaduna but didn't have full control of the region. Lieutenant Colonel Ojuhu, commanding the 5th Battalion in Kano, refused to join the coup. Ojuhu quickly locked the armory and hid the keys. Meanwhile, Ademoyoga and Anufuru, still on the run, decided to head towards Abeokuta, with Finance Minister Festus Okotie still alive in their custody. They executed him in a bush before proceeding. Upon reaching the 2nd Risk Squadron in Abeokuta, they discovered they had been betrayed by their friend, Major Obiano, and were forced to go into hiding. It became evident that the Lagos leg of the coup had failed. With the situation collapsing, Major Ifajuna decided to eliminate Prime Minister Balewa. On Lagos Abeokuta Road, he pulled over, ordered Balewa into a bush, and shot him dead. With the coup failing nationwide, except for parts of North, Ironsi was urged to assume power. On January 16, 1966, he met with the Council of Ministers, and they agreed to hand over power to the military. By January 19, Major Nzeogwu was arrested, followed by most of his fellow plotters. Ifajuna fled to Ghana and was received by President Chukwuma, but later returned to Nigeria, where he was arrested. With the conspirators in custody, the coup was declared over. Aguiyi-Ironsi was promoted from General Officer Commanding to Supreme Commander of the Nigerian Armed Forces, taking control of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Police. He dissolved the civilian institutions, abolished the office of the President and Prime Minister, and replaced the Parliament with a Supreme Military Council. In May 1966, Ironsi issued the Unification Decree, which merged regional civil servants into a single federal service. This angered many Northerners who feared that more educated Southerners, particularly Igbos, would dominate government positions. Violent backlash followed. Northerners rioted, killing many Igbos in the north. The coup was increasingly viewed as an Igbo conspiracy to control Nigeria. This resentment spread to the army, where northern soldiers, mourning their fallen comrades, began plotting revenge. Ironsi's inclusion of northern troops into his security details would prove fatal. On July 29, 1966, just 6 months into his rule, Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Mohammed led a bloody counter-coup, overthrowing and killing General Ironsi. This brutal event became known as the July Remarch.